Welcome back, class. We're going to start our unit on dualism, and I'm going to draw your attention to the handout. If you look at the handout, it starts with number 14. It's because this used to be attached to the spiritual monism handout. That one ended in 13. So I've broken those out now, and they're two different handouts. I just didn't feel like redoing the handout. So let's talk about dualism. Remember, we're in metaphysics. We're looking at all the positions under all is eternal. We looked at material monism first. It says all that exists is matter and matter is eternal. Then we looked at spiritual monism, which is the opposite. All that exists is spirit, and spirit's eternal. There is no matter. Now we want to look at the next logical alternative that says everything is eternal, but they say there's two things that are eternal. Matter is eternal and spirit is eternal. Remember, matter has size, is extended, not conscious. Spirit has no size and is conscious. So we want to look at that position next. So look at the handout. Dualism is the ontological position that there are two kinds of beings or substances, matter and spirit, both of which are eternal. It's distinct from monism, which we've looked at two versions of, and it's distinct from theism, which says God is eternal and everything else is created and temporal. Historical examples of dualism include Greek dualism, Plato and Aristotle, which is what we're going to spend time looking at primarily, Persian Zoroastrianism, Indian Samkhya Yoga, and Mormonism or Latter-day Saints. I sometimes wonder if they don't sometimes fall under material monism the way it's described. I'm talking about Latter-day Saints. So in our class, we're going to look at Plato and Aristotle because they give us sort of the logical options with dualism. Now, dualism has a deep influence on Western philosophy. By now, hopefully you've seen some history video on the history of Western philosophy. If you recall, the first philosophers in the West were material monists. And we saw the skepticism that comes with material monism, and Socrates challenged the material monism of the first philosophers by saying, okay, if everything is matter and it's always in flux and change, then myself is also in flux and change, and there's nothing permanent out there to be known, and there's no permanent nowhere here. So the way Socrates proposed overcoming that problem was by saying there is something permanent, and it's the ideas or the forms. Now maybe Plato took this and developed the idea, but the forms are this realm where the ideal form of everything that exists lives. So there are trees in our world. These trees are imperfect, but there's a realm where the perfect tree, the ideal tree, the form of all trees exists. So that was the way Socrates got permanence. He also talked about the self or the soul as the permanent knower. So the material monist said there is no soul. Socrates proposed that there must be a soul. The self is a soul. So we see the dualism is metaphysical dualism. There's two kinds of beings, material being and spirit being. All right, now let's look at the handout. The appeal of dualism lies in it being the nearest logical alternative to material and spiritual monism, which avoids some criticisms raised against both of those views. It also offers a solution to the problem of evil, generally by locating the problem in matter versus spirit. So here's a problem. So material monism, if everything is material, all is atoms in the void, then you really can't talk about good and evil as something objective. They're subjective opinions relative to the individual. Again, with spiritual monism, all is one, so you can't make a distinction between good and evil. There's just one thing. All you have is karma. So they don't talk about good and evil in material monism or in spiritual monism. But dualism does. Dualism talks about good and evil, and maybe even an eternal conflict between good and evil. Dualism generally says that evil is due to matter, the body, and the soul or spirit is what is good. So there's a conflict between good and evil, matter and spirit. Now it varies on which dualism you're looking at, but it says in general. Now, there are objections here to saying that the soul is good and the body is evil. I should also mention that dualism has greatly influenced Western theism. Remember, theism is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All three of those views have had to deal with the big names of Plato and Aristotle and their influence on the world. And so they do this either by compromising, totally rejecting, or coming up with an alternative explanation of the world. They do it either well or poorly. And so we have a lot of dualism influencing, let's say, Christianity and their view of the afterlife, dying and going to heaven. So let's look at some of the objections to the soul is good and the body is evil. And some of these veer into views of the afterlife in theism. So if the soul is eternal, no beginning and no end, that's the view of the soul in dualism, how can it go through a unique event? For example, growth in knowledge, liberation, or attainment of heaven. Socrates does believe in some form of reincarnation. He talks about it in Plato's Republic and in the book, the dialogue, the Timaeus, in Plato's Dialogues. And I'm thinking it's at the very end of the Republic, there's this myth of it's called. And in the myth of it sounds like heaven and hell, as popular theism talks about it. So let's think about this. If your soul is eternal, then you should have infinite knowledge. Socrates would say you do, but when your soul gets jarred into a body, it's something that makes you forget. And so the process of education that we're going through is a process of remembering what you already know. So you're not learning new things, you're remembering what you already know. But the question is, if my soul had infinite knowledge before it got in a body, why does it need to be in a body? It's not like I'm learning something new. I already knew everything before I was in a body. And if my soul was good and my body is evil, why is my good soul in this bad world? So if the soul is inherently good and eternal and independent of the body, why is it in an evil body? My students and I once read through most of the works of Plato in a class called Plato, and we were trying to figure this out the whole semester. Why do we have to be in a body if my soul is good? I was in the presence of the forms before I was in a body. That was perfection. I was with perfection, and now I'm in imperfection. And not only that, my body is imperfect. So why? And also, you can conceive of an evil spirit like the devil, and evil not being based on your body. So in the Garden of Eden, in the story of the beginning of things in theism, they had everything they could possibly need. They are in paradise, and they did evil. It's not because of bodily needs. They had everything. So you can think of an evil spirit, or you can think of everything you need being provided and still evil happening. So maybe evil isn't due to having a body. This is an objection to that idea that the body is evil. All right, let's go on to number 17 here. Dualistic attitudes are reflected in popular theism, remember God the Creator, in several ways. So popular theism is like what most people believe. Think about people's views of heaven and hell in theism, Christian views, Christian popular views. The world is evil. One should flee it or avoid it. Now, this is what happened in the medieval period with monasticism. Remember, monasticism is we withdraw from the world, work on our spiritual life for the hope of a better life in the future in heaven. This is also connected to ascetic distrust of the sensuous. So practice of asceticism, denial of the desires of the body, because they'll lead you into things like the 7 deadly sins. Remember the 7 deadly sins? The way I remember them is gap sale, gluttony, anger, pride, sloth, avarice, which is like greed. What am I at? Sale. Lust and envy. Yeah, envy. So those are the sins of the flesh. And you have to protect against those by denying the flesh, right? Celibacy is a higher spiritual state. That's where Catholicism went. Second, the world is corruptible, especially in the sins of the flesh. I just mentioned those, and must be guarded against. Versus evil is disregard of reason. That's an alternative. Wait till we get to theism and look at the problem of evil there. The world is morally neutral. It's neither good nor bad in its basic institutional structures. For example, do you think the government's evil? No, it's neutral. I don't know. Personal piety is all that is needed. All we need to do is be good people. Practice good things. Be good people and the world will be good, right? I don't know. And then fourth, the world is good as the creation of God, but not as good as the world to come, heaven. So the world is a good place. We're just pilgrims passing through, but the next life is where it's really at, right? The good is achieved in heaven. Okay, well, let's think of an alternative to that. A philosophical, remember that's the popular view, a philosophical alternative to dualistic otherworldliness of popular theism is to regard creation, the created order, and history as revelation of the divine nature, which means this world is important. This world is where something's happening. This is the only world where you could know God. The source of the knowledge of God, which is the greatest good in theism, and the goal of reading this revelation is that the earth shall be full of the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea. So that's an alternative, this dualistic view of dying and going to heaven. Maybe in theism, God created the world for a purpose, to make his glory known in the world. And no other revelation apart from this world exists. So think about that, hold on to that until we get to theism. We'll open that up a little bit further. But this is just to say that theists have gone the way of dualism, particularly in their otherworldliness, dying and going to heaven, when they should have paid attention to the creation of this world and the importance of this world. Talk about the 2 forms of dualism, one held by Plato, one held by Aristotle, and the critiques of those views. So Plato's view we'll call ordinary dualism. And in ordinary dualism, matter, the material world, is eternal and it's independent of spirit. So Plato thinks that there's matter that's always been around, and there's a being, he calls it the demiurge, who took the matter and formed it into this world. And he was looking at the forms, which is the ideal, and copying them when he formed this world. So he looks at the ideal tree and he forms trees out of the matter in this world. Plato thinks the forms are eternal, the demiurge is eternal, your soul is eternal, matter is eternal. The world we live in is not. It's put together. So the question is going to be, if matter is eternal and it's independent of spirit, how does that work? So let's think about that. If matter is eternal, it would have to be self-maintaining, right? We've already talked about matter's not self-maintaining. So Plato's view is not going to work. So ordinary dualism is Plato's view in which matter is eternal and it's independent of spirit. So the first argument against material monism holds against ordinary dualism or Plato's view. And Aristotle saw something of this. He thought, no, matter can't be self-maintaining and it can't be independent. So the second form of dualism is dependent dualism. This is Aristotle's view. And in Aristotle's view, matter is eternal and it's dependent on spirit. So there's going to be this interrelationship between matter and spirit. Matter can't be this world, and it can't continue to be this world without spirit maintaining it somehow. So look at number 20. Aristotle is going to explain the relationship between matter and spirit. In accounting for change and permanence, so change, all matter is changing, but something has to be permanent. Aristotle analyzes the world in terms of form and matter, potentiality and actuality. So form and matter can be like this. There's some marble, and we want this marble, which is the matter, to be a statue, perhaps a statue of Zeus. For this matter to have the form of a statue of Zeus, it has to be worked upon from the outside. There has to be a craftsman who makes this matter into the statue. Okay, so that's, we have form coming from a form giver, like a spirit's going to work on the matter, like a artisan works on the marble to make this world, okay? Potentiality and actuality. He uses this example of an acorn. An acorn is a seed that is potentially an oak tree. But for this acorn to actually become the oak tree, it has to have soil, it has to have water, it has to have sunlight, so it's acted upon from the outside. So matter and form are going to be like that in terms of the world too. So matter without form is pure potentiality. Now we're talking about all the matter of the universe. Matter, that which is extended, without form is pure potential. The source of all change, the thing that acts upon it from the outside, is the unmoved mover, which is pure actuality. It's spirit without matter. Okay, so you have matter, you have the unmoved mover, and the unmoved mover is going to take its pure actuality, add it to this pure potential to actualize the world. Now here's the problem with this view. The dilemma is a dilemma. Two horns of a dilemma is like a bull is going to gore you. If you go this way, that horn's going to get you. If you go this way, that horn's going to get you. The way to escape is by going through the horns. So the dilemma is this. If matter has some actuality, if matter can be this world without spirit, then so far it's ordinary dualism, and we already said the first argument against materialism holds against ordinary dualism. So that's not going to work. That horn of the dilemma is not a possibility. The other horn, though, if matter has no actuality, if matter can't be without spirit, then matter would be created and temporal. Matter is dependent on spirit in such a way that it can't be. It is created by spirit, which is theism, not dualism. Now, this is also why dualism gets so closely tied to theism later on, because some people think Aristotle has a proof for the existence of God in his metaphysics. So it's because they're looking at this second half of the dilemma. Matter has no actuality without spirit, then matter would be created and temporal. So it looks like at the end of dualism, we don't really have support to go this way metaphysically. Either we're pushed into theism, or we have to give up dualism for, well, I guess that's where we're at. We've been through material monism and saw its shortcomings. We've been through spiritual monism and saw its shortcomings. Now we see the shortcomings of dualism. So perhaps we have to explore theism, and that's where we're going to go next. So what we covered in this lecture was dualism, and I tried to condense it into one conversation. We could always unpack it more, but dualism says there's two kinds of beings, matter and spirit. They're both eternal. We looked at Plato's version and saw the objections. And we looked at Aristotle's version and saw its objections. And now we've completed all is eternal on that side of the square of opposition that says all is eternal. Next, we're going to look at the contradiction, only some is eternal, and see, is this position rationally coherent? Is this the way we should go? All right, so that's where we're going to go next time. Theism is going to be a longer unit because theism has been worked out, particularly philosophically, when it comes to the problem of evil. So that's where we're going to go next. All right, it's going to be awesome.